I haven't lived. I've died a few times.
The narrative surrounding the final days of Bud Cort, who died from complications of pneumonia on February 11, 2026, in Connecticut at the age of 77, has recently been characterized by retrospective commentary as a period of sudden, dramatic confession. Various online summaries have framed his final years as harboring a final revelation regarding his most famous work. The documented reality of his relationship with the 1971 film Harold and Maude, however, does not align with the sudden disclosure of a hidden truth.
Oh, thank you, I don't drink.
Oh, it's all right. It's organic.
The historical record of his career demonstrates that Cort had been openly and consistently articulating his deeply complicated perspective on the film for decades. He frequently described his participation in the project as both a blessing and a curse. He noted that the production environment provided him with a profound, almost unprecedented sense of artistic freedom, but he also recognized that the enduring cultural footprint of the film resulted in a restrictive, lifelong professional label. Furthermore, he consistently maintained that the film's survival and its eventual elevation to the status of a cinematic classic was entirely driven by the audience, rather than by the marketing strategies or financial backing of Paramount Pictures. The beginning of Cort's involvement with Harold and Maude completely bypassed the established protocols of the Hollywood casting process. When Cort first encountered the script, he did not approach the opportunity with the typical deference expected of a young actor seeking employment within the studio system. According to his own later accounts of the pre-production phase, he entered the audition room, which was occupied at the time by director Hal Ashby, screenwriter Colin Higgins, and producer Charles Mulvihill. Upon entering the space, Cort simply announced to the assembled creative team that he would be playing the title role. Director Hal Ashby's reaction to this breach of protocol was reportedly one of immediate amusement and agreement. Cort's profound confidence during this interaction was not without foundation. It was heavily rooted in his recent professional experiences within the industry. He had previously worked under the direction of the highly influential filmmaker Robert Altman on the films MASH and Brewster McCloud.
Every time he goes to Japan, he brings me back something like a lens or a tripod.
Both of those productions were defined by a specific, deadpan, oddball energy that operated strictly outside standard Hollywood conventions. Cort recognized that same specific outsider sensibility existing within the character of Harold. Furthermore, Cort drew directly upon his own personal history to ground the performance. He noted that his Catholic background, coupled with the complex energy and interpersonal dynamics of his own family, allowed him to deeply understand the profound loneliness and isolation driving the character. He recognized the specific emotional frequency of a young man whose primary method of communication with the adult world was the staging of elaborate, fake suicides. Behind the scenes, the production of Harold and Maude was fraught with tension and was viewed by the studio apparatus as a significant financial and creative risk. The original script had not been developed within the standard, highly controlled studio pipeline. It began its existence as a university thesis project written by Colin Higgins. When Paramount Pictures acquired the rights to the screenplay, the studio executives hesitated to allow the young and inexperienced Higgins to direct his own material. Consequently, Hal Ashby, a former film editor who had recently transitioned into the role of director, was brought in to lead the project. Ashby's involvement immediately introduced severe friction with the studio leadership. Ashby possessed a well-documented rebellious streak and a fierce resistance to corporate oversight. As the production moved forward, the conflict between the director's creative vision and the studio's commercial fears escalated rapidly. The situation deteriorated to the point where Ashby drafted a formal, heavily critical letter to Paramount executive Robert Evans. In the correspondence, Ashby expressed his deep frustration over the constant studio interference, explicitly stating that his creative juices had been entirely tapped by the battles, and arguing that the film itself deserved far better treatment than it was receiving from the studio's executive branch. Within this volatile and highly pressurized environment, Cort approached the role of Harold with an intense, often dangerous physical commitment. He did not treat the character as a standard comedic performance, nor did he rely on traditional comedic timing. Instead, he employed a rigorous, immersive methodology, pushing for extreme realism during the film's numerous staged suicide sequences. This unwavering dedication frequently caused severe alarm among the production crew. During the filming of the fake drowning sequence, Cort insisted on remaining face down in a heavily chlorinated swimming pool for multiple consecutive takes. He stayed in the water until his vision became severely impaired, deliberately testing the physical limits of his own body in order to achieve the desired level of stark authenticity on camera. This unwavering commitment to the reality of the character occasionally generated palpable tension on the set, particularly with veteran performers who were accustomed to a different style of filmmaking. During the filming of a critical scene with Vivian Pickles, the established actress playing Harold's mother, Cort made a highly provocative, unscripted choice. While Pickles was delivering a lengthy passage of dialogue informing Harold that he would be joining the military, Cort slowly raised his middle finger and held the gesture, entirely unwavering throughout the duration of her speech. Pickles completed the take, maintaining her professional composure on camera, but she immediately ran off the set the moment Ashby called cut. Ashby reportedly appreciated the raw, unscripted nature of the moment, deeply valuing the unpredictable, chaotic energy it brought to the scene's dynamic, but he ultimately instructed Cort to leave the set and formally apologize to Pickles. Cort's total immersion in the macabre universe of the character also unsettled his colleagues outside of active filming. On one occasion, while walking to the set alongside his co-star, Ruth Gordon, Cort noticed a dead squirrel lying on the ground. He calmly pointed the animal out to Gordon, remarking in a flat, deadpan manner that he wanted to show it to someone, but could not communicate with squirrels. Gordon was reportedly disgusted by the interaction and the sheer casualness of the morbid observation. This seamless blending of actor and character would later become a source of immense professional frustration for Cort. He frequently expressed deep dismay that journalists, critics, and interviewers continuously conflated his deliberate performance with his actual personality. He noted that the press routinely asked him during interviews if he was genuinely disturbed, nutty, or weird, effectively reducing a highly calculated performance to an assumption of mental instability. The core narrative of the film, a romantic relationship between a 20-year-old man and a 79-year-old woman, was an additional source of significant apprehension for Paramount executives. Studio leadership feared the relationship would actively repel mainstream audiences and provoke moral outrage, leading to extensive background discussions about potentially removing the primary love scene entirely in an effort to soften the film's cultural impact. Off-screen, the interpersonal dynamic between Cort and Ruth Gordon did not immediately mirror the deep, immediate connection of their fictional counterparts. Cort later acknowledged that the Oscar-winning veteran actress was initially quite standoffish toward him during the early stages of the production. The professional distance between the established Hollywood legend and the 22-year-old newcomer remained intact until a significant personal tragedy fundamentally altered their relationship. Shortly after the conclusion of principal photography, Cort's father passed away. The morning after his father's death, the very first phone call Cort received was from Ruth Gordon. Rather than offering standard, polite industry condolences, Gordon spoke to him at length about the specific experience of her own father's death. Cort credited this shared grief with completely shifting their dynamic. The profound connection forged in the immediate aftermath of devastating loss allowed them to bond in a way that directly mirrored the film's central thematic argument. Two individuals from vastly different spheres finding profound understanding and connection in the shadow of death. The conflicts that defined the production phase re-emerged aggressively during the post-production and editing phase. Following the completion of filming, Paramount Pictures forcibly assumed direct control of the editing process, physically removing Hal Ashby from the editing room. For a film that relied entirely on a highly delicate, precise tonal balance between dark comedy and sincere tenderness, the removal of the director was viewed by both Ashby and Cort as a devastating, potentially fatal blow to the project's integrity. Cort discovered this shift in control during a routine publicity meeting with studio executives who were discussing the film's upcoming promotional strategies. In a move that blatantly defied standard Hollywood protocols for a young actor seeking to build a long-term career, Cort leveraged his position as the star of the film to defend his director. He explicitly informed the Paramount executives present at the meeting that he would outright refuse to participate in any promotion for the film. He threatened to entirely withhold all major publicity appearances, press interviews, and promotional duties unless the studio immediately reinstated Ashby and returned full creative control of the edit back to the director. The ultimatum was an extraordinary risk, prioritizing intense loyalty to Ashby's artistic vision over Cort's own career advancement and standing with a major studio. The pressure tactic ultimately succeeded. Paramount relented under the threat of a derailed publicity tour, and Ashby was permitted to finalize the edit. However, the studio still retained some ultimate authority over the final product, as studio boss Robert Evans personally mandated the removal of at least one kissing scene between Cort and Gordon, a cut that remained absent in the final theatrical release. Cort later acknowledged that his open defiance during this period created lasting enmity within the studio system, solidifying a permanent reputation for being difficult and uncooperative in an industry that heavily penalized artistic rebellion. Upon its initial theatrical release in 1971, Harold and Maude failed to achieve commercial success and did not secure a positive critical consensus. The studio, already nervous about the film's unconventional tone, controversial romance, and dark subject matter, did not provide robust promotional backing or a wide distribution rollout. Many critics were largely confused by the narrative, with some prominent reviewers describing the film's emotional landscape and thematic obsessions as toxic and repulsive. Despite the immediate financial failure and the negative critical reception, Cort maintained absolute unwavering conviction regarding the film's enduring value. He stated unequivocally in later interviews that, from his very first reading of the screenplay, he knew the project was absolutely destined to become a classic film for the ages. The film's historical trajectory eventually validated Cort's initial assessment, though this success did not occur through the traditional mechanisms of the studio system. Harold and Maude slowly built a massive, fiercely devoted following entirely through independent word of mouth. It found deep traction among younger audiences who identified strongly with the film's central themes of profound alienation, anti-authoritarianism, and the rejection of polite societal norms. Cort consistently emphasized throughout his life that the public, and not Paramount Pictures, refused to let the movie fade into obscurity. The audiences actively resurrected the film through years of midnight screenings, independent theater distribution networks, and a refusal to accept the initial critical dismissal. However, the eventual, undeniable elevation of the film to cult classic status introduced a severe, long-lasting professional limitation for Cort. As the film's reputation grew, he found himself rigidly and inescapably typecast by the film industry. Hollywood casting directors continually offered him endless variations of the Harold archetype, more oddball outsiders, eccentric loners, and deeply weird characters. Cort actively resisted this narrow categorization, turning down numerous roles that felt like shallow repetitions of his previous, far more nuanced work. This firm resistance to being boxed into a single archetype led directly to one of his most significant professional regrets. In the early 1970s, during the height of his resistance to the Harold label, he was offered the role of Billy Bibbit, the severely stuttering and psychologically fragile patient in the film adaptation of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Hoping for a stronger lead role, or perhaps something that would definitively break him out of the oddball mold, Cort declined the offer. He later admitted the immense, lingering sting of this decision, recognizing in hindsight that he had walked away from an immortal piece of cinema and a defining role while trying to carefully protect his career trajectory. His deep frustration with the enduring, unshakable shadow of Harold and Maude frequently manifested in his interactions with the press. When interviewers inevitably attempted to steer conversations toward the 1971 film, Cort would sometimes offer a flat, unyielding response of no comment. He expressed deep, sustained exhaustion with an industry and a media apparatus that seemed entirely incapable of viewing him outside the strict parameters of a single performance delivered when he was 22 years old. The profound psychological burden of severe typecasting was heavily compounded by the stark, unforgiving financial realities of the film's eventual success. While Harold and Maude became a legendary cultural touchstone, screened, discussed, and sold constantly over the subsequent decades, Cort did not share in the massive financial windfall generated by the film's longevity. Due to the highly complex and intentionally opaque mechanisms of traditional Hollywood accounting, the film was technically categorized on paper in a manner that heavily minimized or entirely erased residual payouts for the performers. In a stark, revealing 2010 interview, Cort detailed the insulting reality of his ongoing compensation. He noted that he occasionally received official residual checks from Paramount Pictures in the exact amount of 11 cents. He highlighted the severe, almost absurd disparity between the film's massive cultural footprint and his own financial reality by pointing out that he earned significantly more money for a very brief, minor appearance in the 1995 Michael Mann crime thriller Heat than he ever did for starring in his most famous, enduring work. The narrative regarding Cort's prolonged absences from the screen has frequently been attributed by fans and critics to his notoriously difficult reputation, his resistance to typecasting, or his active rejection of mainstream Hollywood roles. However, the documented truth involves instances of severe, life-altering physical trauma that forcibly removed him from the public eye. In 1979, Cort was involved in a catastrophic, near-fatal automobile collision while driving on the Hollywood freeway. His vehicle struck an abandoned car that had been dangerously left blocking a lane of high-speed traffic. The impact of the collision resulted in devastating physical injuries, including multiple broken bones, a severe concussion, and a heavily fractured skull. The physical damage to his face was particularly extensive and required immediate intervention. He suffered severe facial lacerations, and his lower lip was nearly severed entirely from his face. The immediate aftermath of the 1979 accident required multiple reconstructive surgeries and a prolonged, agonizing recovery period. This extensive physical rehabilitation effectively removed him from the film industry for an extended duration, forcibly halting his career momentum just as he was attempting to redefine his image. The Hollywood industry, inherently resistant to prolonged absences and deeply focused on youth and momentum, moved forward without him, quickly filling the void left by his medical absence. Furthermore, the immense physical toll exacted upon Cort did not end in the late 1970s. In a detailed 2014 interview, Cort disclosed that he had miraculously survived another severe automobile accident just 3 years prior, an event which resulted in his arm being nearly torn completely off his body. In the same interview, he also detailed a separate, horrific physical incident in which his knee essentially detached and fell off his leg. This specific injury was so incredibly severe that it required him to undergo the grueling, humiliating process of completely relearning how to walk. These documented periods of intense physical suffering, numerous surgeries, and agonizing rehabilitation fully account for the massive, unexplained gaps in his filmography, directly countering the prevailing public assumption that he simply chose to step away from the profession due to artistic differences or eccentricity. Despite the compounded, overwhelming challenges of industry typecasting, severe financial inequity, and catastrophic physical injuries, Cort maintained a working career in the decades that followed. As the landscape of independent cinema grew to embrace the dry, absurdist tone he had actively helped pioneer in the early 1970s, a new generation of highly influential filmmakers sought him out for specific projects. He appeared in critically acclaimed films that carried distinct echoes of his early foundational work, securing memorable roles in Kevin Smith's religious satire Dogma and Wes Anderson's highly stylized comedy The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou. These modern directors recognized Cort not merely as an interesting piece of cinematic trivia or a nostalgic callback, but as a foundational architect of the exact specific cinematic language they were utilizing in their own work. As he navigated the later stages of his career, Cort's perspective on the legacy of Harold and Maude underwent a gradual, noticeable evolution. The early, highly publicized bitterness and vocal frustration slowly gave way to a measured, deeply felt pride. He acknowledged the profound, often life-saving impact the film had on marginalized, lonely, and alienated viewers. He expressed a deep understanding that the role he crafted had provided a necessary sense of permission and validation for audiences struggling with their own intense isolation. This late-stage evolution culminated in his final, defining assessment of the film as both a blessing and a curse. A succinct, highly accurate acknowledgement of the profound duality of his cinematic legacy. Throughout his later years, Cort frequently spoke in interviews of his firm intention to publish a comprehensive memoir. He viewed the writing of this book as a vital, necessary opportunity to firmly establish his own narrative on his own terms. He intended to document the exact, unvarnished details of the Ashby editing battles, the harsh realities of the Hollywood accounting practices that resulted in 11-cent checks, and the full, agonizing extent of his numerous physical recoveries. He intended to actively protect his personal history from being flattened into internet gossip, simplified retrospectives, or inaccurate clickbait summaries. When he passed away in February 2026, the numerous obituaries published worldwide highlighted his complex legacy and his undeniable contribution to film history. But the highly anticipated memoir he had spoken of for years remained entirely unfinished and unpublished. The rigorously documented history of Bud Cort reveals a reality far more substantive, complex, and grounded than a hidden deathbed confession. His life stands as a detailed, ongoing account of the tangible consequences of maintaining strict artistic integrity in a commercial landscape. It highlights the deeply punitive nature of the studio system when challenged by its own talent, The severe, often insulting financial disparities hidden beneath the veneer of cult success, and the overwhelming, almost unimaginable physical resilience required to simply survive devastating trauma and return to the screen. Cort did not leave behind a sudden scandal to be uncovered. He left behind a meticulously documented record of what it actually costs to create a permanent piece of cinema, and what is required to survive the long, complicated aftermath of its enduring cultural legacy.